Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast, where we delve into some of the most pressing concerns facing the people of Afghanistan, highlight individuals from around the world and across the political spectrum who have stepped up to render assistance to our Afghan allies, and raise the voices of the many people who have been endangered by the Taliban's oppressive rule. I'm Beth Bailey, here with my co-host, Michael Cook. Today, we're excited to be joined by Lark Escobar, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan with graduate degrees from the Fletcher School of International Law and Diplomacy and North Central University. Lark has a long history of firsthand involvement in Afghanistan. She established 6 libraries in the country and created literacy programming for Afghans who worked alongside U.S. personnel. She also worked with numerous Afghan trainees who would come to the U.S. for language training at the Defense Language Institute English Language Center. She now works to advocate for her former trainees, most of whom qualify for pathways to the U.S. through her work with the Fletcher Afghan Evacuation and Resettlement Working Group. She also supports U.S. government evacuation efforts through Afghan Evac. Lark, thanks for being here tonight with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start our conversation tonight with a discussion of your past involvement with Afghanistan. You deployed to the country while working alongside the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Army. I think a lot of us might understand the Afghan war as something that was really kinetic, our armies fighting against the Taliban. But the work you did was more on the civil society side. Can you tell us about that work and why it was vital to support the democratization of Afghanistan?
So I want to clarify a little bit. I wasn't actually working on the civil society side. I did do some humanitarian work that was voluntary. I organized convoys and took humanitarian assistance to local girls' schools to help them stay in school, but that was not part of my scope of duties. That was my 3 hours off on Friday mornings. So that was not actually the purpose of me being there. It was something I just chose to do because it felt like it was an important thing to support. The reason why I went to Afghanistan is actually part of a bigger picture of U.S. defense security cooperation programs. So I was working as a linguistics teacher, an English professor, so to speak, at the Defense Language Institute at Lackland Air Force Base. And that is a program that is part of the larger security cooperation system from the United States. So the United States military, the defense, the whole industry of defense sales is connected to the US government, but it's actually private businesses that provide those supplies, whether it's planes or weapons, what have you, to other countries that they then either sell or gift. When they sell the supplies to other countries, it's called foreign military sales. The country will approach Congress. There's a POC in Congress who puts together the requirements of the end user. It goes to the defense industry. They bid on it. Congress goes back and says, hey, this is what we've got. Do you want it? And the country will decide, yes, we'll buy it, or no, we won't. There might be some negotiation that happens. And in the end, there's either a sale or there's not. So this is how we sell planes to the Gulf states, or military training, or any of our technology that we export. This is the largest moneymaker for the US government, selling defense stuff. Part of that is also military aid, defense aid. So when it's gifted to a country, we call it aid. So it's international military education and training is the part of that aid that we donate that is like scholarships or also gifts of equipment. Anytime we sell equipment, in general, there's going to be a component that involves training. That training is delivered in English on U.S. military bases, generally speaking. Occasionally, there will be ad hoc trainings available in those countries in which teachers will deploy from the United States to go offer it there. But in general, they'll just get a few training slots at the Naval War College or for the pilot training program in Enid, Oklahoma, wow, or in Pensacola, or in Del Rio, or in Wichita Falls. They'll go for their military trainings on those installations and have a slot in those courses. So in the case of countries like Jordan, it's given. In the case of countries like Saudi Arabia, it's purchased. So if you have a plane, then you have to have a pilot, you have to have a co-pilot. There's probably going to be a meteorologist, an air traffic controller, maintainers for the aircrafts that can do whatever the mechanics are that need to be done when it breaks down. All of those people have to learn their jobs for that piece of equipment, for that function in their military. That involves coming to the US for training, staying for some duration. Before they can do that specialized training, they have to have adequate English to be able to attend the course. That means everyone who's coming to the United States for those military training slots, whether they're purchased or given, has to go through English training at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. There is a language military school set up for this purpose since 1952. In the beginning, it was just for pilots, but it's expanded to be the gatekeeper for all foreign military coming to attend training inside the U.S., from the Naval War College down to airplane mechanics. So when we look at the Security Cooperation Program, this is a moneymaker for the government. It is part of being able to have interoperability between the U.S. military and allied states, being able to sell them equipment and to gift them training, as whatever the case may be, improves bilateral relations. So this is a key function of government. It's a key part of our economy, and it's something we've done since 1952. So part of my job was teaching English to Afghans among all other nations represented among the student population at DLI. When the Afghans came, they were failing their exam in English, and they risked, if they went back home with a failing grade, they risked having reduction in pay, seizure of their assets, imprisonment, being beaten, reduction in rank, like all of the bad things that can happen to someone who messes up in their military. They could have all of that piled upon them, especially if they were from a minority community. There would be extra impetus for exacting social punishments on that individual. So given the high stakes nature, Afghans would go AWOL and escape from the military base and go on an underground railroad up to Canada. I had nothing to do with that. I don't know how it worked exactly. I just know at that time in like 2008, 2009, 2010, Afghans were going missing, and it was a really big security concern for the United States. And Canada had a non-extradition policy because of non-refoulement. They did not want to send Afghans back to the US knowing they'd go and face torture and punishment and other bad things in Afghanistan, and they wouldn't send them back to Afghanistan for the same reason. So they just kept them in Canada, and it was a problem it was the largest diplomatic rift between the US and Canada until I think 2013, they finally came up with an agreement to stop keeping the AWOL Afghans. So it was a long time of more than 5 years of the US and Canada struggling with this issue and trying to understand any Afghans who went AWOL that didn't go to Canada. Where are they? What are they doing? That's obviously a national security concern. So they sent me to go work on literacy programs for the pilots to try to ensure that they could hold a pencil when they arrived to Texas instead of never having held one before. Education was completely banned under the Taliban. And when we made the Afghan National Army, we had to take equally from each of the major ethnic groups in the country. So it was distributed across the 5 ethnicities, which meant people who had historically never had access to education suddenly had to be professionals. And some of the minority ethnicities worked really, really hard and were eager to advance and have a chance. But the people who had kind of always been taken care of just because they were part of a larger community that was better off, in a position of power, in a position to exploit others, they were not as interested in developing instant literacy skills. So it was a struggle to get everyone on the same page and to make sure that they were ready to go. So I was sent to go work with the people who were chosen to come to Texas to try and prepare them better so that we would have all better outcomes, less people going AWOL, and get some of these people actually trained for their specialized training after the English, so that we weren't just wasting money bringing people over for 6 months at a time and then losing them.
Mm-hmm. So while you were doing this, those people had access to certain programming in the U.S. Like I think you've mentioned before, they had driver's licenses, some of them, or maybe social security cards. What kind of risk does that add for an Afghan when they return to Afghanistan and they've had this exposure to America? Does that make them a bigger target for the Taliban?
Yes, and I mean, not that it would necessarily be known that they hold American identity documents. The issue is all of the people who deployed to United States, they were officers in the military. They drove military vehicles to and from work to go to their home every day. Everyone in their community knew they were military. And when they'd stop driving the vehicles because they deployed to United States for 6 months, everybody knew he's not coming home every day. He's in the military. He's disappeared. What's going on? His wife went back to stay with her family for 6 months. Something's going on. So it didn't take a lot for people to understand, oh, he went to America. Mm-hmm. So every officer who had to do any kind of joint operations training, any kind of engagement with the U.S., so like everybody who was a major or above, really at all levels, they faced some level of training from the U.S., whether it was through the ROTC program, the military academy, trying to do operations out in the provinces. They had some kind of contact with Americans. So all of the Afghan National Army and police for 20 years worked directly with us. Mm-hmm. So in my case, when I arrived in Afghanistan and it was clear that I was not just going to be working with a small group trying to improve their English, but working on the systemic problem of why aren't we all having enough English? How can we improve it for everyone? How can we develop a professional, competent fighting force that's getting up to speed with other nations? Because if we don't, they're going to keep dying and we're going to keep wasting money. We've got to do something about the foundation they lack. So I was trying to supplement that by creating programs that directly addressed it, that were largely successful and remained operational until the government of Afghanistan collapsed in August 2021. But what that meant is I was all over the place. I was doing site assessments around the country. I was stationed primarily at the National Military Academy of Afghanistan, which in the beginning was attached to Kaya, the airport military base. And that meant that I was highly visible as a woman. I was young, I was petite, and I'm surrounded by men. And I'm telling some of them what to do, and they're very publicly obeying me. So this was a dynamic that drew a lot of attention. And I was personally placement testing all of the applicants coming into the university to see, did they have any level of literacy? Could they even write their own name in their native language? Could they read their ID card to register themselves for the exam? So trying to understand what was their level of proficiency coming in, screening them, trying to get them tested. They had to interact with me. So even the thousands of people who applied but were not chosen to go to the university were with me in a room, saw my face, had me write down their names, and had a variety of behaviors towards me. So it was very visible when the commandant of the school, the general in charge, had me come sit next to him and explained that this woman is helping us and we're working on trying to improve our professionalism and look at the range of possibilities that now exist because of this relationship. So it was touted as being necessary and valuable, and that was public. And it was public in the media, and it was public in American newspapers. And so it was very clear that this girl from the United States was involved with this, and she's American, even though she kind of looks Afghan, and it was confusing people. So it was a controversy. And because so many of the people had known me from being in training in Texas before I went to Afghanistan, I already was known among some of the students and the officers. So they kind of already knew who I was and that I was there to help. So it positioned me to be really involved in trying to help them craft programs that met their needs. Instead of trying to take a canned curriculum from West Point or from another institution like the Naval Academy or what have you, that was so far above their linguistic level, how can we adapt developing curriculum for them that's going to be meaningful and actually get them to where they need to be? So we were working on that collaboratively, and it was very public and visible. All of those people were seen in photographs with me. All of those people were seen in photographs with other Americans regularly, routinely as part of their job. There was no way to conceal that they were involved with Americans, because that is inherently part of being in the Afghan National Army and Police. It was a training mission. Even people who weren't assigned to be part of the training mission were still doing things within the training mission. So it's not just an issue of them holding an American driver's license or being vetted by the U.S. military prior to arrival to study in Texas. It's that the whole system was highlighting interoperability and cooperation because we set it up that way. And it's not the only situation where we've done that. We had a similar model in Iraq. We will probably continue approaching things that way. We've done lots of cooperative training missions with the Army Special Operators who go into situations like the Philippines, and they do training operations with them. And it's not an isolated thing. This is our approach. And the approach inherently endangers all of the participants.
Right.
Not
Those
immediately.
Right. They look really good on DVIDs, but it doesn't look good in the aftermath. What about for women? You were a woman doing all of this work, but what about, were you able to bring women into these programs?
Yes. So one of my responsibilities was helping integrate 5 female pilot candidates into what we were standing up in Afghan Air Force. It wasn't a smooth process, and it wasn't even smooth when we brought them to Texas. Like when my deployment ended, they also shortly thereafter followed me to Texas. I had worked with them in the evenings after my duty day at 8 o'clock at night, trying to help them improve their English. It was better than any of the guys. So I was really trying to make sure that they would be competitive so that the language was not the reason why they were rejected. Their arms were too short because they were petite. We filed for waivers. Major Melissa Moon Brown helped me get waivers for them, and we pushed it forward to make sure that they would have an equitable opportunity to contribute. And it wasn't that the first 5 were just amazing and everything went well. It's a process. You have to keep learning and trying again and get more and so on. But it got the ball rolling. And those women did come and study in Texas. And of course, as a result, they are at increased risk. And we wanted them to be visible, and we wanted them to be active, showing, look how far we've come since the Taliban being in control. We've got a modern force. There are 5 women present. And when that was successful through the Thunder Lab program, the women were recruited out of the ROTC candidacy program and put into the Air Advisor Thunder Lab situation, which I think was managed by Afghans, but I'm not entirely sure how that structure worked. I just would go there occasionally, like once every 2 weeks, to do presentations for them. It wasn't a daily thing for me, but the model was successful. So then we pivoted and did the same thing, focusing on integration of women at the National Military Academy, which would be their equivalent of West Point or Sandhurst. So we did have 40 women join the military academy, and we had to come up with plans for how to do that well and how to make sure that they were doing something meaningful on the other end. So the big question was, okay, we can get them the education, they can get the qualification, they're academically capable, but what careers do they fill that is not serving TEADS generals when they graduate? So trying to explore how to structure that, how to ensure that there were safety measures in place, like physically at the campus, so that they were not being unduly exposed to harm and risk.
And out of those women that you're talking about that went through the pilot program, do any of them qualify for a pathway to the United States?
They could under the P referral program called the U.S. RAP. So there's priority 1 and priority 2 are typically called P status applications, and they are a very slow, difficult process because the tidal wave of applications that came all at once has just inundated the system. Although all of that was avoidable, this is the only possibility that requires having one of their military supervisors who is still involved with them to complete the referral process. The Afghan can't apply. It's not like the special immigrant visa program where they put everything together and they collect their letters and they collect all of their evidence and they push it forward. The referral has to be done by their military person, which means in both cases, in both programs, they have to still have contact with someone they haven't worked with for a decade or more than a decade.
Sure.
And like the people who came to the Defense Language Institute, they're in theory eligible for P status, but DLI has had thousands of Afghans, probably 2,000 or 3,000 over 20 years. And they did not summarily submit applications for all of these people. They wouldn't even provide Department of State a roster confirming who had attended before 10 years ago. They only provided the most recent batch. They didn't even go back to the people that I taught when I was working there. So people that were very much at risk were not even included in the verifications for that data request that happened. And after that data request, my understanding is that there was no further relay of information. Like that was in August. I asked for help having referrals processed in December, and the Defense Language Institute was like, we're overwhelmed and we don't have the staff to do this. And I wasn't allowed to do it for them. It has to come through the channels. And I don't work there anymore. I since moved on to other things in my career. I went to NATO and then I taught at a women's university in the Middle East. And it was not something that I was positioned to do for hundreds of people, and not all of them were my direct students. In the process of finding out that they were not being referred, we tried to submit civ applications for them. And this is with the expectation that it could potentially be rejected. But that's because of the parameters of the civ program. The civ program requires that they had a very specific type of employment contract. And all of the people who came under security cooperation programs were paid to their Bank of America bank accounts. It wasn't through 3M or Booz Allen Hamilton or whoever the defense contractor might be. They were paid directly to their Bank of America bank accounts where they used their ATM card. Like, it was not something that was through an indirect grapevine in Afghanistan. This was in America. Who's more at risk? Hard to say, but I wouldn't say that the people who studied in Texas are less at risk because they were paid a different way.
Sure.
It seems ridiculous to me that we're playing with human lives, people who were eager to please us, people who were eager to have their careers flourish and to have equal opportunities. There was a Hazara gentleman that was a major in the Afghan National Army. He was a pharmacist in his previous career, and he was so excited to try and contribute in a meaningful way. He joined the military and became an English professor. So like the trajectory for him was a very deliberate one. It was not like a significant pay increase. It was not a power thing. It was his ethnicity had the opportunity to engage in a meaningful way that never existed before. So he pivoted with this understanding that this is going to help his country and make Afghanistan better for his community. So he was compelled to try, and we celebrated that and we encouraged it. And now all of that is a veritable death sentence.
I've found, I don't know if you two have had this experience, highly unfortunate. I was interacting with someone and they told me that they did not think that any Afghans should be coming here. Ukrainians were fine because they were more like us than Afghans are. And I find that that's kind of this latent undercurrent in society where not a lot of people are willing to stand up for Afghans. And very few of us have had the opportunity that you, Lark, have had in being able to develop really close relations with the amazing Afghans who worked with us. What would you say that our listeners can do to help advocate for Afghans and maybe change the minds of our friends, family, and neighbors who are wary of welcoming them here?
So I think the first part of that is I need to go back to the idea of the special immigrant program. In order to really fix this situation, we have to have those civ categories of eligibility expanded. It cannot be contingent upon having a specific type of payment coming to you. It has to be based on actual risk and exposure, invisibility of dealing with the United States. It should include all of the people who attended DLI, because that captures anyone who went to stateside training, and they are most definitely affiliated and known to be connected to the United States. So it's inexcusable to leave them to die, and they are dying. How do I convince someone to engage in advocacy for the Afghan Adjustment Act and civ category expansion? I don't know how to convince people to care about others, but I care about them because it's the right thing to do. They should not be dying because they learned English. They should not be dying because they liked coming to United States and working with the U.S. Army. They should not be dying because they believed in trying to improve their country, reduce corruption, and promote democratization. Those are not things people should be dying for. And it's not different or better than Ukraine or less than Ukraine. And Afghans are not inherently less valuable than Ukrainians. I've had students from both countries. They're all lovely. When somebody says something like that, it just comes off as racism to me. It's bigotry. The solution, I would say, is trying to get them involved, invite them to come and see and help and welcome Afghans who are new arrivals. Look at the circumstances that they're in, that we're leaving them in. Even here, some resettlement agencies are amazing. There's excellent work happening in Houston. Other places, there's no support at all. Communities should be stepping up. Religious communities should be welcoming refugee arrivals. So I don't know how to make people do the right thing. I think good people will be motivated to try and help. And there's something everyone can do.
For sure. And just one more thing to add, like, these are not random Afghans that are coming to our country, right? Like, all these people that are coming over on these programs are people that stood shoulder to shoulder with our troops for 20 years and put their life on the line to fight the Taliban. So, you know, I would guess that almost every Afghan that's in the country right now has probably done a lot more for our country than the person, you know, that made these comments. It's just my guess.
Right. It was totally integrated. The processes were interwoven, they were inextricable, and the goals were shared interests. So it was not just that we are trying to promote, like, Afghan men can become like Turkish military or some ethereal, like, let's have this pie in the sky kind of goal for what Afghanistan should be. But there were shared interests. The people wanted it to be fair. They wanted employment. They wanted their country to be stable. I think the Taliban have a very false narrative of unity and that they have this heavy control over the country because it's unified, and Afghanistan has never been unified. It's always been a country that has had a very diverse population. There are 13 major ethnic enclaves that have distinct cultures and languages. So the Taliban is only one of them, and it's only a small section of one of them and doesn't even represent all of the Pashtun ethnicity. And it's really sad that there's this sense of ethno-nationalism that has clouded the presentation of who Afghans are. These people are anti-Taliban. They're pro having freedom. They are pro education. They are hardworking people who normally pay taxes and are gainfully employed and are literate and are hardworking. Why are we diminishing them as human beings?
And some of the most hospitable people that you'll ever meet in your entire life.
Yeah, Afghans have a strong tradition of hospitality, and they have very delicious food. And in general, they will share it with you, even if it costs them everything. They are the kind of people who will give you the shirt off your back if they think it's going to help you.
Yeah, sorry, Beth. I just had one example that I have that it just came to my mind. My friend Abdul that I was helping get out of the country in August, made his way through Abbey Gate, and he's literally like in the shit-filled canal, up to his waist at Abbey Gate, like fighting for his life to get out of the country. And whenever I could get him on the phone, which was rare because the phone lines were getting cut, there was jammers, like it was so hard to get a hold of him. And he would answer the phone and he'd be like, "Hey brother, how's your family?" I'd be like, "Abdul, like, shut up and tell me what's going on. Like, we need to like get things going here." But he's just like so concerned about me sitting here in my house, sitting on my couch. That's just the Afghan way, and it's incredible.
That's the same thing I experience every time I have contact with any of the hundreds of Afghans that I've spoken with in the past 16 months. And they always ask me how I'm doing first. The Taliban could have visited them the day before. They could have threatened their son. They could have done any number of terrible things. They could be out of money, out of food. And the first thing they always ask me is, "How are you doing, Sister John?" So it's an amazing culture. And I hope that more people will do volunteering work and get to know our new Afghan neighbors, and hopefully many more as these programs move along as slowly as they are right now. I wanted to talk about some of the other at-risk populations. So we've talked about the DLA or DLI trainees, but what are some other populations that maybe aren't getting media coverage but are at great risk for Taliban reprisal?
So I have several thousand Afghans on my evacuation roster. The original portion are people connected to DLI that were working either through DLI or through the National Military Academy of Afghanistan as interpreters or as support teachers that were civilian hires into the military academy. So that's sort of the first bubble of people. The remainder of my roster includes pilots. It includes prosecutors. The prosecutors are justice sector employees who promoted rule of law by prosecuting the Taliban for rape, murder, and terrorism and narcotics trafficking. And they put them in prison. And the majority of the Taliban have been in prison. They are a criminal cartel. It's not a monolith. There are different trends that happen within the different factions of the Taliban. They're very much in competition with each other, and that often involves choosing criminal activities to try to justify their budgets and make their goals achievable. But the people that are putting them in prison were representing the interests of the West and democracy in its local form. The court system in Afghanistan is modeled after the Ottoman model. So it's not like you have a jury of peers and you've got a full courtroom and lots of reporters and things. It's a judge, it's a prosecutor, it's the accused, and a lawyer that represents the accused. So the prosecutor has to present the sentencing, he has to do the investigation, or she has to present the entire case. And so the prosecutor is going to be doing the work of what we would consider to be a detective, as well as the lawyer, as well as the jury. In some level, they were facing a risk all along in trying to do those prosecutions, and many people received direct threats in the course of their duties. When all of those people were in prison and the U.S. left abruptly and inappropriately, and the Taliban released everyone from prison within 3 hours of Ghani's departure, they basically said, "You are free to go get revenge on your oppressors," meaning go slaughter all of the people who put you here. So even if those individuals had not been in the Taliban at the time that they committed crimes, they were sure motivated to participate and join because now they've been given an endorsement to go commit more crime. So all of the prosecutors had a matter of hours to get into hiding in order to survive. And some went to places like Iran and Pakistan, even though those situations are not significantly better. or safer than being in Afghanistan, but that was what they had the resources to manage. And many of them are in safe houses and hiding and have to constantly move, and they're in fear and poverty and cold all the time. And it's stressful and difficult to just try and keep them safe. And every time they have a problem, they have to contact us, and we have to try to navigate whatever emergency they're facing from around the world with budgets that are just grassroots fundraising. And we don't have support for those individuals because they weren't employees of any facet of the U.S. government. They just received rule of law training from ICRC or the UN or a university in the United States who did a 6-week training on this or that, or brought them to the U.S. to study temporarily in a semester program or on a teaching exchange. And out of my thousands, I have the 2 different groups, and people are dying. Like we've gotten the people who were civ eligible that had started applications years ago. We've gotten 21 of them to the U.S. in the last year. In the same period of time, I've had 5 people perish, and 3 of them were prosecutors, and 1 was a pilot, and then others starved to death in a family. So it's been really horrible because we know when they get abducted, we try to negotiate and we make compromises trying to give inducements for their release. And you don't ever know if you're going to get it through before they die. And they do get tortured to death. We lost another person in December who was pulled out of his vehicle and shot in the street. So there's a level of impunity that can exist within the Taliban because they know that they can just blame it on unarmed gunmen or ISIS. That's the favorite scapegoat. And there are times when ISIS was in prison and was part of the people that prosecutors definitely went after and tried to hold accountable for their crimes. But it's very convenient to blame every dead body on the cold weather or the starvation or the terrorism from ISIS instead of admitting that there's something larger and nefarious going on. It's a small population. You know, the justice sector in Afghanistan is about 3,000 people, and they were very publicly in the limelight for prosecuting bad guys, and they're just getting attacked and hunted, and that's the thanks they get for trying to further the global interest in peace.
Yeah. So is the Taliban reaching out to you after these abductions, or your organization, or how does that communication happening?
No, the family gets the message to other people and they get the message to me, and then I relay it to the people who try to work on inducements, and we see if we can get anybody negotiated out. And how those things happen is back channeling. None of it's official.
Sure.
And I can't really disclose much about that, but it's very tedious. Like sometimes we're going for more than 24 hours in a row without a break, trying to find someone and trying to keep them safe. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And how much are we giving up in the inducements that we're, compromising for to secure an individual life? The problem is if we don't, it becomes a business model. You capture this guy, you torture him a bit, his family finds out what's going on, they ask for help, then they get something that they want in order to stop the negative behavior. So it's a system of manipulation, and they figured that out really quickly. So all they have to do is go after people, and sometimes they kill them, and whoops, okay, well, that one's gone, we'll just go find another one. So it's a system that we inadvertently created by leaving these people without any path forward. And it's not fair for them to die because they were trying to prosecute murder and terrorism. The prosecutions of terrorism directly benefited United States. That's how we defeated the situation with the Taliban. In the first place was by establishing institutions that were seeking to further this agenda of not just having a crime free-for-all and the total obliteration of human rights, and to establish those human rights norms and the regime of human rights and justice has cost these people personally they've been sacrificed, and that's completely inappropriate, and we still don't have a plan for how to keep them safe. The U.S. government has not come up with a system for keeping people who are most at risk out of harm's way. Risk that we placed them in, we encouraged and rewarded them for taking, that we demanded had to be done. We put them there, and now we've left them.
And anyone who follows you on Twitter knows that this work that you're doing, I mean, it's nonstop and it takes a toll on you personally. I mean, you can hear it in the stories you tell too, Lark, but what are the other difficult aspects of doing the work that you're doing right now, which is basically the volunteer duty? It's a volunteer duty, but you're doing the work of the U.S. government in some ways.
Yeah, it's more voluntold than volunteer, because there were other individuals who could have taken responsibility, institutions who could have taken responsibility for any of these people, and were not motivated to. So then the choice is, hear about your students begging for help and not being helped and being left to die, or do something. And for me, like, what teacher lets their students die? Like, I'm not a doctor, I don't have an oath to do that, but it still seems like the moral thing to do. And it's unconscionable to me that this is the best that our system came up with, is to force veterans and friends of Afghans to step up to the plate and gap fill for the Department of State. Like, evacuations after a conflict seems like a pretty normal, like, immigration into the United States is a government function. It should not be a job I'm being forced to do full-time without a salary. I'm doing consular work. I am doing emergency aid, humanitarian assistance, the legal advocacy, preparing cases to go to the International Criminal Court. This is not stuff that should be happening for free, but if Department of State doesn't choose to pay us, we still have to do it, because otherwise human lives will be lost. Unnecessarily, people that have had dinner in my house, how can I let them die? How can I let their children die? They're innocent. They didn't deserve any of this. So the choice is try and advocate for civ category expansion through the Afghan Adjustment Act. Is being blocked by Chuck Grassley and a handful of senators who are anti-immigration for the theatrics of it. And that's very difficult to deal with every day, knowing they have excellent salaries and health insurance and get to sleep every day. And volunteers working on this situation, however they came to be working on it, remain unrecognized, remain unacknowledged by the government, remain in poverty, having lost marriages, houses, retirement funds, effectively reducing their compensation from their military service to keep their colleagues alive, who are in danger because of the manner and method of the U.S. withdrawal decisions made by mediocre men in positions of unearned authority. And who are the people in the coalition doing the majority of this work? It's women.
It's true. There are so many amazing women behind the scenes who have not gotten any recognition for what they're doing. And it's really heartening to see you all and to be able to give you a platform here too. It's so important for people to know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't hear enough about it. A lot of what we've talked about is so heavy and so difficult to process, but I want to end on maybe a hopeful note for the Afghans who are in their country right now, or in Pakistan right now, dealing with another harsh winter, with no answers about when they might come to the U.S. What words of hope would you give them, or what kinds of things would you give them to help them just keep pressing forward?
I would encourage them to focus on the things that they can control, which is going to include getting their vaccines for measles, for mumps, for rubella, for chicken pox, for pneumonia, for the flu, for COVID, and keeping those things current for all members of their family, because that's going to avoid delays later down the line. Taking the measures to do things like brush your teeth and wash your hands with soap for at least 30 seconds are going to reduce illnesses that cause children to suffer and die unnecessarily. We provide public health information as well as other resettlement information on Saturdays in general. But this is something that it sounds like common sense, but when you're in crisis, you forget to pay attention to these things, and a toothache becomes a trip to the emergency room with Taliban on your heels. And money that you've now got to take away from your meager food budget that you got from begging and now have to spend on a hospital bill. So just having those sorts of wise behaviors, not taking unnecessary risks, are all like the usual things that I would immediately recommend. Also, this is a prime opportunity to be working on our language skills. If you want to end up in the United States or even in a country like UAE on an employment visa or whatever the case may be, studying in India, all of that's going to require English proficiency. You can't have too much, and you're going to need a lot. And it's not just you. Your wife is going to have it. She's going to be working in the United States. Your kids are going to have it. They're going to be behind in school and risk being bullied, like the boy who was bullied to the point of being suicidal recently. We want to avoid those emergencies by using this opportunity to really develop our language skills. And there's plenty of free resources online. We offer some over Twitter and on YouTube, but there's an abundance on the internet. So be using that chance to study privately with your family in your home. Everybody has to be literate. The women, the children, everybody in your family. It cannot just be that the employee of the government is the person who's competent in speaking English. Everyone must be proficient. So use your time to prepare that. I know it doesn't make it feel like anything's going to get better faster, but by improving your English skills before you arrive, you'll have better employment opportunities upon arrival. You'll get a higher salary. You'll be treated with more respect. More people will be interested in helping you and supporting you because they'll be able to talk with you. If you remain isolated and you don't learn the English, everything will be a struggle, and it's not going to be better than the situation you're already in.
Those are really good concrete tips. What about for those of us who are listening who are in the U.S. and are already maybe looking for ways to help? It sounds like we could maybe call Senator Grassley's office and ask for passing the Afghan Adjustment Act, but demand. I like it. What else can we do to break down these impediments to our Afghan allies coming here more rapidly?
Call every senator, but especially Chuck Grassley, and let him know it's unacceptable to be enslaving Americans for the U.S. government just because we can't find the political will to figure this out. These are solvable problems. They could be solved in a day if we chose to. The Afghan Adjustment Act, the Civ category expansion, the lack of pay for all of the people in this constellation. There's at least 180 organizations in the groups that I work with that are all similar in size and scope to mine, or potentially even bigger, dealing with thousands more cases. Like No One Left Behind is probably managing 60,000 or 70,000 cases. You know, Task Force Argo, the same thing. And they deal with populations that I don't deal with. They deal with orphan children and Operation North Star. And some of those organizations deal with populations that I don't have to engage with, just the widowed women who no longer have an applicant that they can rely on for movement forward, or never had an attachment to someone that was connected with the U.S. government, are just now victims of the Taliban and the new policies of the Taliban. So everyone's at risk. If you're not part of the Taliban, you're at risk. What can people in the U.S. do? Support this legislative initiative. Help the Afghans who arrive learn about Afghanistan. There are so many amazing books. Read Dear Zari. It's an excellent compilation of 4 stories that are true of women that are Afghan, written in English. It's available on Amazon. Support Afghan businesses. Try to give Afghan restaurants, buy Afghan cookbooks, give them as gifts to people. All of that eventually adds up to help. Donate your furniture, donate your clothing, get involved with the local refugee services in your area. You don't have to do it every week. You can pick a family to help. There's going to be an opportunity to do sponsorship for Afghans. We expect it to be available soon, perhaps in the spring. It does involve some financial commitment and some level of responsibility for the people that you're helping sponsor, but that can save a lot of lives. So if communities and churches and other communities of faith grouped together, they could easily bring a handful of people that will then not die. And that's a win. So all of those are opportunities to help. Volunteering with our organizations, getting involved with the existing ecosphere of the coalitions, trying to find out how you can contribute 2 or 3 hours a week in saving human lives. All of those things matter. I would definitely also say we all have an individual responsibility to not be racist and to not be Islamophobic and to not make assumptions about people who are more like us than we believe. Focusing on things that we don't understand just leads to more fear and tension and stress and death. If we take the time to learn about somebody who's from Afghanistan that we haven't heard of before, or things about the culture that confuse us, we can begin to understand that the extremist behavior is not representative of Afghanistan at large, and we as a country will benefit from welcoming these people who have made very long, clear commitments to us and to the things that we represent.
That was incredible. Lark, thanks so much for joining us tonight to talk about the ways that you've supported Afghanistan and the Afghans who are currently suffering so greatly for the role that they played supporting our operations. It means the world to us to have you here. At the Afghanistan Project, we always want to give voice to the people of Afghanistan about the ordeals they've undergone during almost 2 decades of war and their country's tumultuous return to Taliban rule. So today we're sharing the story of Nazreen to close, and we've changed her name to protect her identity. Like many Afghans who worked in conjunction with a U.S. government program, Nazreen believed she would be referred to the U.S. refugee admissions program, but instead she was left to support her children in the Taliban's Afghanistan while her Taliban-affiliated ex-husband threatened to marry her daughter off to a Talib. This is Nazreen's story in her own words, and some of it is very difficult to hear. Hi, Beth and Mikael. I am Nazreen. I'm from Herat province. I have 4 children and I am their guardian. I was forced to marry when I was 10 years old under the first period of the Taliban. I became the mother of my first child when I was 13. I was a mother of 3 when I was 18 years old. I lived with my husband for 15 years and he oppressed me a lot. I tried to commit suicide many times, but I survived with the help of doctors. During Hamid Karzai's presidency, I managed to separate from my husband with the decision of the Herat prosecutor's office, and now I have my children with me. I have been living apart from my husband for 10 years. My husband was against my work. I am a hairdresser and a sports club coach, and I had many social activities. I had a small business always attended by women, and I was a breadwinner for my family of 5. I had freedom. When the Taliban came, my husband came, and he was with the Taliban. He warned that he wanted to take my daughter with him to give her to the Taliban as a bride. My daughter is 22 years old. She was in her last year of university when I had to leave home and life and come to Kabul. My husband threatened me, and I hid my little girl and boy. I was on the evacuation list in Kabul in August 2021, but my turn to leave never came. We hid in Kabul with no hope. Now they want to repeat the story of my life and force my daughter to marry. My life was ruined with the arrival of the Taliban. An administrator from one of the groups I am in said he would apply for me to receive a Priority 1 referral to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. The file number never came. I was on 3 organizations' evacuation lists. I was asked in August 2021 to go to Mazar-e-Sharif to take a flight out of the country in late September. The airline evacuated its own people instead of our team. I never wanted to leave Afghanistan. I love my country. Several months ago, the situation forced me to flee to Pakistan. I came with a lot of problems, and now I live in fear of arrest and deportation. I had a visa, and when it expired, I was able to extend it for 3 months for medical reasons. They will not renew my visa again. I fear returning to Afghanistan. My husband may kill me and force my daughter into marriage. We want to thank Nazreen for sharing that really harrowing story for our listeners, and for any Afghans who want to have a story considered for a future episode, please send us a detailed letter about your situation and let us know whether you prefer to remain anonymous. That correspondence can be sent to our show address, which is the Afghanistan Project Podcast @gmail.com. In our show notes, you'll find that address and links to the Fletcher Afghan Evacuation and Resettlement Working Group's website and Lark's Twitter profile, which contains a wealth of knowledge for Afghans seeking evacuation and lots of fantastic rants, which always make my day. I'm also going to put in some links to the book that Lark mentioned and to a recipe for Kabuli pulao that I will be making this week. And I don't make it nearly as well as the Afghan woman who once made it for me. Once again, we want to thank Lark for joining us, and we'd like to thank all our listeners for sharing their time and supporting the people of Afghanistan. Tasha Kaur, and we hope to see you again soon.